Thanks, Jay. And I'm going to disagree with absolutely everybody here. Everybody. Let me just start with two quick introductory comments. First of all, the purpose of pre-war diplomacy is not to avoid war. You've all assumed that, but in fact, lots of governments engage in pre-war diplomacy to legitimate war. So let's just take that, or I see somebody nodding, so we have to take that equivalent off the table here. And secondly, here's the disagreement where I want to reverse entirely the argument. And I know Paul disagrees because there were several clues in the book here that the consequences, and we want to distinguish between two phases. The decision to go to war, which is a human decision, right? And that's how the question's asked, it's explicit, and war fighting, which we can argue. Whether it's entirely AI-driven, human augmented, we can go down the rabbit hole another night, okay, Jay? But right for tonight, we're just in, it's a human decision. So here's the paradox, that the consequences of AI for pre-war diplomacy, which is the human part, depends on, good old us, on how we perceive the technology. And that's far more important than the technology itself. That is an age-old pattern. There is nothing new here. Paul and I both work on the history of war in different ways, and we've known this for a long time. Let me draw two worlds for you, because there's an ironic conclusion. World one, human decision makers, as you just said, are really not, they don't trust AI fully for this kind of decision, for a whole bunch of reasons. They worry about increased speed, truncated decision-making, dual use. I could go on and on and on. They worry about chance, they worry about inadvertence, they worry about accident, all this kind of stuff, and they don't trust it at all. And because they don't, in the pre-war period, they're very cautious about going to war where AI warfighting might happen. So the argument may be, and that's from the Google discussion, if you really want to prevent this, you let this stuff go on because it's actually going to increase the distrust of AI in the warfighting phase, right? I see how Jay gets the paradox. World two is the reverse. And here, Michael referred to this earlier, but I'm sorry to disappoint you, Michael. It doesn't quite work this way. Yes, war is a result of bargaining failures, but what do the experts mean by that? It's a result of bargaining failures, which is incomplete information and the incentives to conceal information, which the parties have. That's where you get the bargaining failures. There's analogies in economics. So what happens in an AI, if you actually trusted AI, you would actually increase leaders' confidence that they could predict, because that's what AI does, could predict the outcome. And just think of the impact on leaders. The leader who predicted accurately, because they trusted that they would win, would go to hell for it. And you would get pre-war diplomacy would be a sham, and it would be actually far more difficult to prevent the war. The uncertainty that people have about who will win the war has been one of the strongest breaks on whether states go to war. So what do I conclude? If you trust AI weapons and you think that those AI simulations are really valuable predictors in the way that Paul says they might be, war actually becomes more likely. Moral of the story, uncertainty is good for our survival. Thanks, Jay.
Janice, thank you for that. Could you just elaborate a little more when you said your primary thesis was uncertainty is good for war, and because certainty would give the victor increased confidence, or the predicted victor increased confidence to engage.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it at the same time give the prospective loser increased confidence to surrender?
That would be the argument, right? But don't forget, both, that assumes, by the way, that assumes symmetry among the two sides in the pre-war period, which is not a necessary assumption. Could be asymmetrical. One could trust, one could not. So you could see the different possibilities that you have. So if you knew, because you trusted AI, that you were going to lose the war, you just wouldn't go. You could see, right?
Right.
But you would have to trust. That's what I say. If you trust, that would work. One party would concede. The other party might nevertheless have incentives to go to war anyway. So let me give you an example. If Putin had good AI, he has lousy advisors because they're all afraid to talk to him. But if he had good AI, and that good AI had shown this was no 3-day walk in the park, which is what he was told, this was going to drain his economy, he might not have gone to war, but he might have bluffed anyway, right? And Ukraine, it would have predicted they would lose. So they would have conceded. And under those circumstances, you can have an outcome where Russia walked all over Ukraine. You reward the aggressor because one side knows they're going to lose. So the uncertainty is actually a healthy break, not only on preventing war, because that's not the only objective. And this is in Paul's book. The other objective is you don't want to reward aggression. Because otherwise you live in a world where the strong do what they want and the rest of us do what we must. If we didn't have information failures and we have perfectly trustworthy, predictable AIs, we would have a world where the strong would do what they want and the rest of us would have to cede and do what we can. I don't think that's the world that we're all talking about, that we would consider virtuous.
So, Janice, in your view, a high fidelity prediction world benefits the Goliaths,
Yes.
penalizes the Davids,
Yes.
and that every once in a while a David is benefits from uncertainty. And the case you're offering here is Ukraine was a David, and
yes. The AI and the aggressor and the victim would both know the outcome. The victim would cede. The stronger would walk in, take all the resources, human, technological, anything else they wanted, and that would be it. So that's the difficulty with the frame that we've all been using, that the problem is war. War is just one instrument among many that we use to manage imbalances of power. And that's much more important problem than the actual war. War is the symptom of much deeper power imbalances. And taking war out of the picture exacerbates those power imbalances.
Great discussion. And this is an even much more difficult question than the first one, because we're dealing with all of these really complicated issues of what does the technology do, which we don't know yet with AI. I mean, AI is evolving very rapidly, how our military is going to use it. But then there's the perception that that gives policymakers. And like, how do they, so if they now have AI embedded throughout their military, do they think that it makes their military more susceptible to accidents and it's not trustworthy because AI does strange things? Or do they think it's this wonder weapon that now they're going to walk all over adversaries because they have this magic? And that's actually much harder because it depends a lot on how people react to the technology. I mean, I think the hope here is really what Janice was outlining, this idea that if AI could give people better understanding of the relative balance of power, then maybe it can reduce wars. I'm inclined to think that would reduce wars, but that does hinge on some assumptions about like what are the causes of war, which is a debatable sort of proposition in the first place. But the fear that I would have is that people have overconfidence in the machines. And I think that the sort of Putin thought experiment that Janice outlined is a great one, because presumably if Putin knew that what would have happened when he invaded Ukraine, he wouldn't have done it. I'm assuming that's the case, right? This is not the outcome he was looking for. So let's say you had this AI system that the Russian intelligence services had come together and they brought in this algorithm and it said, sir, we've calculated all these probabilities and there's no chance we're going to win. If we invade, we will lose. And let's say it accurately predicted everything that happened. Would he have listened to it? Would he have believed it? Right? Or would he have said, like, that's not true, I don't believe that, or what I think is probably even more likely, would he have said, would that never have occurred because his intelligence services would have fed the same garbage they were feeding him into the AI to make sure that the AI was giving him the answer that they wanted it to give him? And so these are like these are ultimately difficult human questions, and I think really challenging ones, but awesome discussion.